Hello, and welcome to the ninth edition of Kevin's Novel Ideas. Yes, it's been a while since I've been on. Lots going on in my life, but I've read a book recently that I just couldn't not pass up discussing on this podcast. So I'd like to get to that right away. Hope everyone's doing well. The book is called Abundance, and it was written by Ezra Klein, who is somebody you all probably are fairly familiar with, a New York Times journalist. He's got a podcast out there, co-founder of Vox, and Derek Thompson, who's also a journalist primarily for The Atlantic. And the book's name again is Abundance. It's a fairly recent book. I liked it a lot. Clearly, they're both come from the liberal side of the equation. If you're looking for political bents here, New York Times, Fox, The Atlantic. But I think what they have to say really kind of emphasizes sort of where we're at, particularly the United States, in regards to mostly economic, but also cultural issues. So I'd like to start with their introduction, and it'll give you an idea of kind of where we're going. So let me read a little bit from the introduction here. You open your eyes at dawn and turn in the cool bed sheets. A few feet above your head, affixed to the top of the roof, a layer of solar panels blinks in the morning sun. Their power mixes with electricity pulled from several clean energy sources. Towering wind-vying turbines to the east, small nuclear power plants to the north, deep geothermal wells to the south. 40 years ago, your parents cooled their bedrooms with jewels dredged out of coal mines and oil pits that mined rocks and burned them, coating their lungs in the byproducts. They encased their world, your world, in chemical heat trap. Today that seems barbaric. You live in a cocoon of energy so clean it barely leaves a carbon trace, and so cheap you can scarcely find it on your monthly bill. The year is 2050. You walk to the kitchen to turn on the sink. Water from the ocean pours out of the faucet. It's fresh and clear, piped from a desalination plant. These facilities use microbial membranes to squeeze out the ocean salt. Today they provide more than half of the country's fresh used water. Previously overtaxed rivers such as the Colorado have surged back now that we don't rely on them to irrigate our farms and fill our coffee cups. In the Phoenix and Las Vegas areas, previously parched cities are erupting in green foliage. You open the refrigerator. In the fruit and vegetable drawer are apples, tomatoes, and an eggplant, shipped from the nearest farm mere miles away. These crops don't grow horizontally across fields. They grow vertically on tiered shelves inside a tall greenhouse. Banks of LED lights deliver the photons the plants need in precisely timed increments. These skyscraper farms spare countless acres for forests and parks. As for the chicken and beef, much of it comes from cellular meat facilities, which grow animal cells to make chicken breasts and ribeye steaks. No live animals needed, which means no confinement and slaughter. Once prohibitively expensive, cultivated meat scaled with the help of plentiful electricity. When your parents were young, nearly 25% of all global land was used to raise livestock for human consumption. That is unimaginable now. Much of that land has been rewilded. Out of the window and across the street, an autonomous drone is dropping off the latest shipment of star pills. Several years ago, daily medications that reduced overeating, cured addiction, and slowed cellular aging were considered miracle drugs for the rich, especially when we discovered that key molecules were best synthesized in the zero-gravity conditions of space. But these days, automated factories thrum in low orbit. Cheap rocketry conveys the medicine down to Earth, where it saved millions of lives and billions of healthy years. Outside, the air is clean and humming with the purr of electric machines all around you. Electric cars and trucks glide down the road, quiet as a light breeze and mostly self-driving. Children and adult commuters follow on electric bikes and scooters, some personally owned and some belonging to subscription networks run by the city. Another last-mile delivery drone descends from a canopy level, pauses over a neighbor's yard like a hummingbird, and drops off a package. These e-bots now deliver a sizable chunk of online orders, reducing the drudgery of much human delivery work. Your micro-earpiece pings, a voice text from a friend and his family on their way to the airport for another weekend vacation. Across the economy, the combination of artificial intelligence, labor rights, and economic reforms have reduced poverty and shortened the work week. Thanks to higher productivity from AI, most people can complete what used to be a full week of work in a few days, which has expanded the number of holidays, long weekends, and vacation. Less work has not meant less pay. AI is built on collective knowledge of humanity, so its profits are shared. Your friends are flying from New York to London. The trip will take them just over 2 hours. Modern jet airliners now routinely reach Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, using a mix of traditional and green synthetic fuels that release far less carbon into the air. The world has changed, not just the virtual dance of pixels on your screens, the physical world too. Its houses, its energy, its infrastructure, its medicines, its hard tech. How different this era is from the opening decades of the 21st century, which unspooled a string of braided crises: a housing crisis, a financial crisis, a pandemic, a climate crisis, political crisis. For years, we accepted homelessness and poverty, and untreated disease and declining life expectancy. For years, we knew what we needed to build to alleviate the scarcities so many faced and create the opportunities so many wanted, and we simply didn't build it. For years, we failed to invent and implement technology that would make the world cleaner, healthier, and richer. For years, we constrained our ability to solve the most important problems. Why? Scarcity is a choice. This book is dedicated to a simple idea: to have the future we want, we need to build and invent more of what we need. That's it. That's the thesis. It reads, even to us, as too simple. So that's the introduction. So they build this picture of a world, and I sort of like it because the name of it is Abundance. And if you know anything about economics, one of the first lessons you learn in economics is it's a scarce universe, right? There's scarcity, and it's a fight over resources, and it's sort of a little bit of a zero sum equation, right? Is kind of how traditional economics is presented. And here it's like, well, we can have all these things. And a lot of it is through technology, right? We hear a lot today about the artificial intelligence technology. We're making advances in health. There's energy technologies, fusion, solar, wind. All these technologies have really started to accelerate over my lifetime, definitely. So we're sort of on the path, but we haven't created this world that they're imagining in about 25 years from now. So the book is really the basis for why have we not yet gotten there, and what is standing in our way, and how we can create a path to the future so that we can have this abundance, that we can use technology to everyone's benefit, that we can clear the path, both as from a private sector basis and from a governmental basis, to get to where we need to go to get to that vision that they just presented. So again, continuing in the introduction, I'll read a little bit more. And yet the story of America in the 21st century is a story of chosen scarcities, which I just described. Recognizing that these scarcities are chosen, that we could choose otherwise, is thrilling. Confronting the reasons we choose otherwise is maddening. We say that we want to save the planet from climate change, but in practice, many Americans are dead set against the clean energy revolution, with even liberal states shutting down zero-carbon nuclear plants and protesting solar power projects. We say that housing is a human right, yet our richest cities have made it excruciatingly difficult to build new homes. We say we want better health care, better medicine, and more cures to terrible diseases, but we tolerate a system of research funding and regulation that pulls scientists away from their most promising work, denying millions of people the discoveries that might extend or improve their lives. So this is kind of, they set the scene. Okay, we can have all these things. We're choosing scarcity because of these other choices that we make. As delineated here, we say we want certain things, but yet we have this not in my backyard mentality. So that sort of makes sense to me, as kind of a framework that they've set up here. So basically they're going to look at several different aspects here: housing, energy, transportation, and healthcare, which is kind of as we talk about the economy, those are huge parts of the economy. And when you hear people discuss the economy, it's usually in one of those areas, right? We care about healthcare, we care about energy. he'll get into food a little bit, dealing with transportation, but housing is a key component. So these are kind of key aspects of our life and how both the private market and government are working to either provide that or not provide that on the basis that we need. Going further in the introduction, they describe laws meant to ensure that government considers the consequences of its actions have made it too difficult for government to act consequentially. Institutional renewal is a labor that every generation faces anew, but some of this reflects a kind of ideological conspiracy at the heart of our politics. And this this kind of rang true for me. And if you've listened to my other podcasts in regards to the sensible center, um, this is kind of the little bit of the basis that both sides of the ideological spectrum um, are at a conspiracy to get us to do nothing, right? They're pointing fingers at each other rather than finding solutions in the center. And our recent gerrymandering that's been going on is not going to help any of that matter. It seems like we're heading in the opposite direction, that our two-party system is getting to such a point that it's going to be so obvious that we need a different solution. How it's going to come about, I don't know. I'm hoping to restart my other podcast and called it Democracy 2.0 to kind of raise some of the ideas that are out there and continue to push in that direction, that we need to kind of, as they say here, institutional renewal. And I think our democratic process and the way we're set up needs to have a rethink in regards to how we're going to go about this, because we do have big problems to solve. We've encountered many crises over the last 20, 25 years. I don't think our government is thinking about these things. They're thinking small, they're not thinking big, and we need kind of an institutional renewal to get leadership that is going to be thinking about these things. Maybe I've spoiled the conclusion here, but we'll get to that later. So to go on, he says, we've attached to a story of America, of an American decline that is centered around ideological disagreement. That's where we're at. That makes it easy to miss pathologies rooted in ideological collusion. Over the course of the 20th century, America developed a right, when he says right, he means on the spectrum, political spectrum, that fought the government, and a left that hobbled it. Debates over the size of government obscured the diminishing capacity of government, which is kind of what I just said. An abundance of consumer goods distracted us from a scarcity of homes and energy and infrastructure and science breakthroughs. A counterbalance is emerging, but is young yet, which I totally agree with, and which is kind of what I just described. Um, if you remember in the early 80s, when Ronald Reagan was running for president, he said, government is not the solution, government is the problem. Um, I think that was a little bit of the growing size of our government, of our bureaucracy, and they point out, and it wasn't just coming from the right, it came from the left. In 1996, the President Bill Clinton announced the era of big government is over. The notion that the U.S. government cannot solve America's problems was not unilaterally produced by Reagan and the GOP. It was co-produced by both parties and reinforced by their leaders. So, so this is what he's saying, that kind of both sides are kind of locked into this ideological perspective. They have a disagreement over over how it's being done. The Democrats add more bureaucracy, and the governments try to shrink government. But both of them are basically hobbling what we can do as a society. Um, and their focus is going to be more here on the Democratic side because they're left leaning. And I think a lot of this book is kind of focusing on sort of a lecture to Democratic leadership, saying, here's kind of the path that we need to go. Here's the vision that is missing in the idea of that government and society can do big things, and how we've gotten off that path over time, particularly in the United States. And they go on in the introduction here. Democrats learned to look for opportunities to subsidize. They gave little thought to the difficulties of production. So this is another piece of this here. He talks about scarcity. The authors believe that clearly economics deals with supply and demand, right? Um, they're not so much part of what we talk about is sort of limiting demand, using less gas, using other things, and they're looking at more on the supply side, saying here there's an abundance that could be had here. We're thinking too small. There's things that can be produced. We just kind of need to have the leadership and the systems to encourage this production and to encourage research and technology. So this is what they're getting in. The Democrats have generally, rather than look to produce more, they've said, okay, there's a demand, so we're going to give money so that the price of that is cheaper, and it's kind of backfired as they go into here. So Democrats learned to look for opportunities to subsidize. They gave little thought to the difficulties of production. The problem is that if you subsidize demand for something that is scarce, you'll raise prices or force rationing. But that cannot be said for housing, education, and medicine. Society cares about access to these goods and services, as it should be. Democrats and Republicans passed policies into law that collectively spend trillions of dollars helping people afford them, right? So we want to help people have good housing. We want to have people have health care and education, right? So the government, through its policies, has subsidized those. That's been clear, right? Um, the deduction for your mortgage interest, giving you credits, subsidizing education, student loans, Pell Grants, medicine, Obamacare, Medicare, Medicaid, has helped people to, or has subsidized that. But the problem is that it hasn't solved the production side, right? The supply side has not been treated. All you did was put more money into the demand side. So, but giving people a subsidy for a good whose supply is choked is like going on. Is choked is like building a ladder to try to reach an elevator that is racing ever upward. The results of that mistake are everywhere. In 1950, the median home price was 2.2 times the average annual income. By 2020, it was 6 times the average annual income. Between 1999 and 2023, the average premium for employer-based family health insurance rose from $5,791 to $23,968, an increase of more than 300%. And the worker contribution to that premium more than quadrupled. In 1970, the average annual cost of tuition and fees was $394 at public colleges and $1,700 at private colleges. In 2023, it was $11,310 at public colleges for in-state students and $41,740 at private colleges. Finally, child care for an infant and 4-year-old costs on average $36,000 in Massachusetts, $28,000 in California, and $28,000 in Minnesota. So subsidizing those costs, their theory is, and I kind of believe it here, has really contributed to the rise. I think there are other factors, but when you subsidize the demand rather than fix the production problem, you're going to raise the prices, and then you're kind of in a spiral, right? Like he said, like they said, chasing an elevator that keeps on going upward. And we've all encountered this, right? These areas, housing, energy, education, medicine, have seen the biggest rise in costs in my lifetime for sure. Dig within the equations that power modern economics, they go on, and you'll find that growth. So the key here is kind of growth. So that gets back to the title here called abundance. So it's like, how do we, subsidizing is not working. We can't just, and that's led to more government debt, honestly. And I always say, well, government debt is there, but it's ended in that money's ended up in somebody's pockets, right? They didn't literally burn that. It ended up, even if you buy bombs that end up, exploding, that went to some factory somewhere. The base materials might be lost, but that paid for the worker, the materials along the line. So the money went somewhere within the economy. Same thing with medicine, education, healthcare. But as we've subsidized, we've grown our debt to make it seem like we can afford these things without looking at the production side, which is what they're getting into here. And they're going to talk about, I think it's something that most people don't understand because we talk about growth and GDP growth, and there's only a couple ways to grow, and they get into it right here. Dig within the equations that power modern economics, and you'll find that growth comes from one of a few places. An economy can grow because it adds more people, which is why I think immigration is generally good. You grow by adding people, they go to work, you grow the economy, they have ideas, all that good stuff. It can grow because it adds more land or natural resources. That typically requires war or taking over other territories or discoveries under the ground, right? But once these avenues are exhausted, it needs to do more with what it has. People need to think up new ideas. Factories need to innovate new processes. These new ideas and processes must be encoded in new technologies. All this is grouped under the sterile label of productivity. So basically, you need to have more people, more resources, and more productivity. That's the only way we grow. How much can we produce with the same number of people and resources? When productivity surges, what we get is not more of what we had, but new things we never imagined. Which is kind of the exciting part when I say about technology. And, lately we've been talking a lot about AI. I don't think we should just slam the door on AI because I think the productivity and the new ideas that could come for that are exciting. The problem is that there's a downside too, right? In regards to whose hands are they in, um, uh, these technologies, um, putting guardrails in, regulating. It's not easy. Um, it's not easy to find that line, and that's the things we need to be talking about, and that's what we need leadership for and well thought out strategies. We could do it. It's not easy, but we need to be thinking about it, and we need to have the right incentives and people in place. We'll get to that even further much later. Much that we want, they go into it. For the world we want, we already know how to build. But much that we need for the world we want still needs to be invented and improved. Green hydrogen and cement, nuclear fusion, treatments for terminal cancers that overwhelm today's therapies, and the shadowy autoimmune diseases that baffle today's doctors. AI that molds itself to the needs of children who learn and think differently. Markets will, we hope, offer some of these advances, but not nearly enough of them. The market cannot, on its own, distinguish between the riches that flow from burning coal and the wealth that is created by bettering battery technology. Government can. The market will not, on its own, fund the risky technologies whose payoff is social rather than economic. Government must. So he's saying you kind of need the partnership between the two. You need them working together, and it's not all way or another. It's not all, oh, we need smaller government and market will figure it all out, or we need this huge government that has all the answers, which is kind of the ideological divide that was mentioned earlier, and which we've kind of fallen into here. We need to get out of that one-way thinking and think that there's somewhere in the middle that the right can provide good hedges on the left, and the left can provide things that the right can't, and we need to be talking each other to get there. Um, and he mentions a book that political scientists had written. In their book, President's Populism and the Crisis of Democracy, the political scientists William Howell and Terry Moe write that populists don't just feed on socio-economic discontent. And we're in a period of time right now where we're seeing lots of populism, not only in this country but across the globe. Right? Um, they they feed on ineffective government. It goes on to say, and their great appeal is that they claim to replace it with a government that is effective through their own autocratic power. I don't think you can have anything more appropriate for the time than that sentence. Um, we look at China, and we'll get into China gets things done, right? So we look and say, oh, look at that. They could get things done through autocratic power, right? Not through a democratic process. Uh, we're trying to operate within a democracy, right? So it's a push pull type of thing. We could say, wow, look at that they could build a dam or a hospital overnight. Um, yes, I think they probably rolled over a lot of things to get there. But then again, you can't have 80 committees trying to approve a hospital, right? So there's got to be a median there, and I think we've probably gone over to the edge where there's a bit too much, and that's what we'll get into this a little further. So I just want to talk about a couple of the areas that they've highlighted. Like I said, they talk about housing, transportation, energy, and health in the book. And with all the books I discussed, there's so much more within this book than I will be able to touch on in this short podcast. But I just kind of want to highlight a couple of those and kind of get you interested in the topic, because I think every American should read this book, because I think if we start thinking about things this way, we'll start voting for people who are at least talking about things this way more. And once we get that leadership, hopefully we'll get laws and changes that will help us get to that future that they discuss at the beginning of the book. So in housing, they talk about homelessness, because clearly we've especially in as been pointed out in large cities, a lot of them run by Democratic mayors. We've kind of created further problem here, and they'll get into kind of why they see that has happened. So the way to think about homelessness, they write, is to imagine a game of musical chairs. With 10 chairs and 10 people, everyone will find a chair when the music stops. That will be true even if one of the players is on crutches. With 9 chairs, someone will inevitably be left out. That's when individual life circumstances begin to predict homelessness. If you live in a city with too few homes, poverty and drug abuse and unemployment and mental illness make it likelier that you will be among those who end up without a home. But the cause of homelessness isn't the poverty or the addiction or the unemployment. All those conditions are far more prevalent in, say, West Virginia than in California. And yet California has 6 times the per capita homelessness of West Virginia. So here's the supply problem, right? We don't have enough housing in these large cities. We need to create it. And unfortunately, the not in my backyard, the, and we'll discuss it here. This is a good piece that they add here. Let me get to it right now. So how do we ensure that housing is both appreciating of value for homeowners, but cheap enough for all would-be homeowners to buy in? So that's the push-pull, right? Not in my backyard is, well, if you build this affordable housing in my neighborhood where I just paid $1 million for my condo, well, geez, I'm going to start losing value on my home. That's a push-pull, right? That's the what my friends on the right would call limousine liberals. They like the idea of it until it affects them, right? The logic that they go on, the logic of this is inescapable, and the politics it creates predictable. A home's value is directly tied to the scarcity of housing for other people. The writer goes on to say, this system by its nature pits incumbents against newcomers. How do we overcome that? It's not easy, right? We need to do it in a sensible manner. We need to take people's opinion into it, but we need to get it done. We can't be so tied up in bureaucratic nonsense and not my backyardism and comment periods and everyone is able to file a lawsuit to stop something from happening that we get nothing done, and that creates a bigger problem because those people in the $1 million homes don't want people homeless on the streets in their city also, and nor is it fair to the people who can't get affordable housing to not have a home to live in. So again, leadership and how to think about these things. So that's housing. Just a bit on the homelessness side of things. Transportation, they go on. In the time California spent failing to complete its 500-mile high-speed rail system, which is legendary, China has built more than 23,000 miles of high-speed rail. One of the authors, Ezra, walked the path of the track with the engineers who built it. He heard less about engineering problems than political problems. He stood on a patch of Freeway 99 that had been moved in order to clear the hoped-for train's path. Not far from there was a mini storage facility. In folk imagination, eminent domain is a simple process by which the state simply tells you that it wants your land and then gives you some money and takes it from you. In reality, it took the High Speed Rail Authority 4 separate requests for possession from this mini storage facility that was in its path, and 2.5 years of legal wrangling to get the land. Um, that's kind of where I talked about. I was talking about China and clearing the path. So yes, we need individual property rights, but our system has become so weighted in one direction. It's not one or the other. It's a medium and a pendulum, and their argument, and I agree with it, is the pendulum has swung strictly one way. Um, and they point out it's not just California. Democrats today are as searing in their criticisms of public sclerosis as any Republican. John Podesta, the graybeard who oversaw the rollout of the Inflation Reduction Act for Joe Biden, bemoaned that delays are pervasive at every level of government, federal, state, and local. We got so good at stopping projects that we forgot how to build things in America. So even the Democrats are looking at this and saying there's a problem here. Even so, the United States is notable for how much we spend and how little we get. It costs about $609 million to build a kilometer, about zero point 0.6 miles of rail here. Crazy. Germany builds it for 384 million. Canada gets it done for 295. Japan 267. It all seems very expensive, but obviously their order of magnitude is less than ours. Portugal was the cheapest at 96 million. All these countries built more tunnels than we do, perhaps because they retain the confidence to regularly try. The better you are at building infrastructure, the more ambitious you can be when imagining infrastructure to build. We looked into it, and it turns out all those countries also have governments. So the problem cannot simply be government, nor is the problem unions, another favored bugaboo of the right. Union density in all those countries are higher than in the United States. Regarding healthcare, we all know about the length of the approval process, going overseas for surgeries because of our messed up healthcare system. We are the only place in the world that does it this way, especially on the healthcare funding and the insurance side of things. And that's why we spend the most for the least results, or very near the bottom of it. On energy, while we're seeing results with solar, energy, and wind, we keep on hearing drill baby drill as an election slogan, and we keep I've traveled around over the last couple of years, and Chinese electric vehicles are everywhere else but here. We're keeping them out, and so people are paying more for electronic vehicles that they need to, because we're protecting our gas-powered automotive industry. I don't know how long it will be, but we're clearly stepping behind the rest of the world and moving to electric vehicles. I can guarantee you that. Um, those are the problems, right? We've covered housing, we've covered transportation, healthcare, and a little bit of energy, which they highlight in much more detail in the book than I've kind of just breezed through there. So the question is, why? Why are these other countries able to do things where we're not? We're the great United States. We've done great things. I believe in this country fully, and talking about these things is not being patriotic. I would argue it's being terribly patriotic, because I'd like to see us get what they talked about and get to where they talked about in the beginning of the chapter, and I do think it's honestly possible to get there. We just need to have the mindset that we can get there. And so they discuss a key reason why they think that we are where we're at, and kind of a little bit about where, and you can read much more about it in the book, but I'll touch on it, where kind of we need to go. So they reference an incendiary article in the Michigan Law Review, written by a gentleman called Bagley in 2019. So In 2019, Begley published an editorial article in the Michigan Law Review, which he later turned into a policy paper. The procedure fetish argued that something has gone wrong inside government, inside liberalism, inside Begley's own profession. Liberal legalism, and through it liberal government, has become process obsessed rather than outcomes orientated. It has convinced itself that the state's legitimacy would be earned through compliance with an endless catalog of rules and restraints be earned rather than through getting things done for the people it claimed to serve. Inflexible procedural rules are a hallmark of the American state, Begley wrote. The ubiquity of court challenges, the artificial rigors of notice and comment ruling, zealous environmental review, pre-enforced review of agency rules, Pickeyan legal rules governing hiring and procurement, nationwide court injunctions. The list goes on and on. Collectively, these procedures frustrate the very government action that progressives demand to address the urgent problems that now confront us. So again, as I mentioned, um, they believe in government. These guys are from the liberal end, but they're preaching, they're lecturing the liberal side of the equation here. That we've gotten carried away with this legalistic procedural. Everyone needs to have a say and a million court challenges, and then we end up nowhere. We end up without a rail system in the fifth largest economy in the world, that is the state of California. It's really ridiculous, and we need to get out of the thinking that it's all going to be done by the market, which is kind of what the right thinks, but the left has kind of hobbled our ability to do this through this huge growth of government and bureaucracy. He points out that America is unusually legalistic compared to other countries. In fact, it has always been that way, they point out. In 1835, Alex de Tocqueville, I hope I'm saying that right. I never pronounce his name. I always read it. He's the French guy that went around the United States and kind of did a survey and wrote about it and said all the good things and bad things that he saw. Scarcely any political question, Tocqueville wrote, arises in the United States that is not resolved sooner or later into a judicial question. What was true then is truer now, the authors say. America has twice as many lawyers per capita as Germany and 4 times as many as France. Much of this energy is now devoted to suing the government. In 1967, there were 3 cases per 100,000 Americans directed at enforcing federal laws. By 1976, there were 13. By 2014, there were 41. So we're a very legalistic society. The prevalence of lawyers in America is unusual, but their dominance at the top of American politics is startling. Though they make up less than 1% of the population, lawyers currently constitute more than a third of the House of Representatives and more than half of the Senate. Fully half of the last 10 presidents were lawyers, as are more than a third of the officials now serving in the states as governor, lieutenant governor, and secretary of state. Begley writes, in the Democratic Party, every presidential and vice presidential nominee, from Walter Mondale to Kamala Harris, attended law school. Tim Walz, in this respect, was almost a radical break with tradition. When you make legal training the default training for a political career, you make legal thinking the default thinking in politics. And legal thinking centers around statutory language and commitment to process, not results and outcomes. So that boils down. That's one of the key reasons why they think we have an issue here, and I think it's correct. I think we need to get out of voting for lawyers to be our representatives. We need businessmen. We need educators. We need doctors. We need housewives. We need them to be a representation of the American people. And so when we go to the election booth and we go to vote, it would be helpful if we knew who we were voting for. So it's on us, right? I mean, it's ultimately on us in a democracy. We voted these people in, and we need to either change the system so that we're not selecting these people as much as we are, or we need to start choosing different people. ultimately we need, as I would say, a new energized leadership that has a proven track record of getting shit done. Uh, I think I'm beginning to hear that come up more in conversations with the candidates, but we need more of it. I think we're on the brink of it. I think people, as I always say, awareness is, I don't know, 80, I think about 80, 75, 80% of getting to the solution. I think um, so much of the time we're not aware of things and we go through things blindly and not think of it. And I think reading a book like this and people writing about topics like this raise awareness, and that's why I'm just trying to raise awareness on my end by talking to my podcast listeners here a little bit, because I think this starts conversations amongst people and gets them more aware. And I do honestly believe that gets to a tipping point, and that's how change happens. Um, I do think once we are aware of things, I think the solutions become a lot easier. And then once a lot of people are aware of things and it's so obvious, I think that's when we reach a tipping point and things really accelerate as far as change. That's my belief, and that's why I bring these things up in my podcasts, just to hope to be a little part of that change at the end of the day. Uh, so I'd like to conclude here with kind of uh, a little bit more reading from the book in regards to what they think needs to be done here. So, if you remember, the governor of the state of Pennsylvania is Shapiro, and they had a bridge fall down, collapse. In fact, that was a big part of their transportation network, and he's very well known. And if you want to read about it, Google it. That I believe they put it up in a couple weeks. So they, because there was such a need for it, and this little piece of the book describes an interview with Shapiro and what he said. The Washington Post asked Shapiro to write an op-ed reflecting on lessons he'd learned. The first lesson, he said, was empower strong leadership. The key to rebuild was that people in charge of the rebuild could act. Managers of every component of the project were empowered to be decisive, take ownership and make a call when necessary, not defer and delay to the often circular bureaucracy, Shapiro wrote. The process Shapiro used would typically be illegal, yet national Democrats and Pennsylvania voters alike loved it. What does that say about the typical process? So they cut through. They cut through the paperwork. They went around the process, the legalistic process. I don't think that's necessarily the right thing to do. They were an emergency, so they did it. And I think that was emergency powers that did it. I think we should change the procedures, right? We should make them so that you can act, so that we can get things done. And honestly, I not to bring up Doge, which was the Department of Government Efficiency, I believe, which I think probably was not what we're talking about here. I think I have various opinions on that, which I've stated elsewhere, but I don't think that's what they were getting at here. I was trying to make government more efficient. I'm all for that. We should look at every regulation. It should be they should be justified. We shouldn't keep on writing laws and have um, laws that our lawmakers don't even read because they're so long and complicated. We do have a complicated country. We do have a complicated economy, but there's got to be a better way. And I think we part of it is probably getting lawyers out of being our representatives. What is needed most is a change in idea, they go on to say, namely a reversal of those intellectual trends of the past 50 years or so that have brought us to the current pass. On the right, this means abandoning the knee-jerk anti-statism of recent decades, which means government's the problem, embracing the legitimacy of a large, complex welfare and regulatory state. Like I just said, we're a large, complex economy and country. We can't simplify everything to one sheet of paper. It's not going to happen. But we can be aware of that we could do better than what we're currently doing. And recognizing the vital role played by the nation's public service, not just the police and military. I believe people in government agencies are public service and they're trying to serve the public, and we should provide them the basis for doing such. On the left, it means reconsidering the decentralized, legalistic model of governments that has guided progressive-led state expansion since the 1960s, reducing the veto power that activist groups exercise in the courts, and shifting the focus of policy design from ensuring that power is subject to progressive checks to ensuring that power can actually be exercised effectively. I couldn't say it better. I think that's what we need to do. And again, it's holding these two ideas in the mind at the same time, that we need government, but we need effective government. It's not about uh, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's about making things more effective. And if we don't think we can do it, we might as well just give up. I do think we can do it. We've done it before, but we need more people talking about this. We need to make it part of our conversation. We need when we see candidates debate, they should be talking about these things, not nonsense, which is a lot of what we hear. So we need to demand better. So unfortunately, this has become a little bit of a political discussion, but my heart says that we can have this abundant state, and we are on the brink of a very exciting time in regard to some of these advances. And I think the authors here have rightly pointed it out and have rightly wrote this book for this time, because I think we all need to hear it. So I encourage you to read the book. Thank you so much for listening again. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I will be back on my other podcasts and do more of this one in the near future. Take care. Thanks.